Welcome everybody, so I am here and back at it again with a brand new movie review, and today we're going to be reviewing Marvel Studios' Black Panther. So if you see an image of Black Panther behind me, that is the movie that we're going to be talking about. This movie is directed by Ryan Coogler, as well as stars Chadwick Boseman, who plays Black Panther or T'Challa himself, and Michael B. Jordan as Killmonger. So basically what is this movie about? Well, there's this secret society in Africa known as Wakanda. Wakanda is pretty much hidden from the entire world, including the world that the Avengers kind of reside in. They're kind of doing sort of missions in such nations as South Korea. They're kind of interacting with the world via other means. They're trying to collect this thing called vibranium, which kind of powers their technology as well as their suits. Vibranium is used even in the medical field that they're kind of studying in, and Shuri, which is T'Challa's sister, is pretty much the main sort of person in that field that is kind of studying this stuff and kind of reverse engineering technology so that they can have better gear and equipment. And I really did kind of enjoy myself in this movie. When I watched this for the first time in the theaters, there was an instance like 20 minutes into the movie, there's this guy that was on their cell phone, which I thought was kind of annoying. I hate when people are on their cell phones in movies, and someone literally down the aisle had to tell him to get off his phone and stuff like that because it was being rather distracting and rather rude. And it's like, why are you there to watch a movie if you're going to be on your cell phone? I think that this movie has a lot of rewatchability factor to this. I think that this movie has a lot of really cool action sequences, even though some of the special effects and the visual effects look like they're outdated graphics from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man days, which I do like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films. But when your movie kind of looks like that in sort of the modern era when this movie came out, which is 2018, there's something wrong with this film, especially the fact that most modern visual effects look really good, especially with films like Marvel's Avengers Infinity War. This movie kind of takes that and kind of pushes out some unfinished CGI and visual effects and stuff, and I definitely noticed that while watching the movie as well. But that does not take away from my enjoyment from this movie. I think this is a rather C-grade film, and I know a lot of people really hated this movie when this film came out. They said that it was kind of bad and kind of boring and didn't really reflect African culture as a whole, but I think that this movie is definitely something that audiences will definitely enjoy. I think the story about how Killmonger pretty much grew up as sort of a poor individual and kind of rose through the ranks as sort of this killing machine, which is pretty much the opposite of what T'Challa is pretty much living under. T'Challa is basically living under the fact that his father was a really wealthy politician, and he kind of rose to power that way through the ranks of Wakanda. The Wakandas have a really cool culture where there's this big giant fight sequence that takes place at the beginning of the film. The way that they kind of take the throne of Wakanda is that they have to pretty much fight each other to the death, or at least knock each other to the ground and everything. Whoever pretty much submits first is basically the person that does not get the throne, and whoever wins that battle basically becomes king. And I thought that was a really cool way to start this movie. Yes, it's a little bit contrived because of what happens if further down the line, like with what happens with Killmonger, somebody tries to retake the throne who is pretty much a tyrant and a dictator, and that is pretty much what Killmonger is. He's pretty much trying to retake something that he thinks is rightfully his, and in so doing, he only thinks in black and white, whereas T'Challa thinks in sort of a different variant altogether. T'Challa is always doing things for the greater good, whereas Killmonger is trying to kind of build his own empire, trying to cast out people that look differently than him and think differently than him. And I think that that is one of the messages of this film. Even one of the actors from The Hobbit is in this movie, and I think he does a really good job. He does a really good job in pretty much everything that he's in. And Andy Serkis is one of the antagonists in the film, and he plays Claw in this movie. And Claw is a really great character. I think Andy Serkis gets really overlooked in a lot of the films that he does. I've liked him ever since he pretty much played Gollum in Lord of the Rings, or Smeagol, and Kong as well in the King Kong films. I think he takes his roles pretty darn seriously within these movies. I think that he does a really good job with the motion capture technology and the stuff that he's pretty much involved with the motion capture stuff. And I think that he is really underutilized and underrepresented within the film industry. I think that him as a character in this movie, where he's pretty much playing a realistic character, where he's not sort of computer generated through most of this film, I think he does a really great job. There's a scene where Chadwick Boseman is pretty much interrogating him after he kind of tries to steal ancient sort of Wakandan artifacts with Michael B. Jordan's character within the film, and they pretty much steal artifacts from a museum, and that's where you kind of get that scene in the film where Killmonger basically kills a woman who's pretty much working at the museum, trying to, teach him about where sort of Answer's technology came from. This movie also stems from the fact that there's this piece of vibranium that kind of crashed to the ground. Everybody's kind of searching for that stuff because, like I said before in this review, it powers their suits. It powers sort of the Black Panther technology, which allows Chadwick Boseman's character to kind of take bullets and ammunition and stuff like that. And you see throughout this movie that Chadwick Boseman's character is pretty much haunted by the fact that his father was killed. They kind of set up his relationship with his dad earlier on in Captain America Civil War, which is a movie I have yet to review. And I think they set it up pretty perfectly that his father is killed in sort of a meeting where he's trying to set up the events that would lead to the Sokovia Accords, and how his relationship with the Avengers and stuff like that, he's pretty much acting on his own will and for the will of the Wakandans. He's trying to do what's best for his people while also trying to retain law and order when Killmonger comes back into his life after killing Claw later on in the film. And you get that sort of sequence where they're kind of interrogating Claw, and he's acting pretty much insane through the movie. He's singing "Baby Don't Hurt Me No More," which I think is pretty funny. I think everybody in that theater when that scene came up laughed. There's a lot of really cool funny moments within this film. The Marvel MCU is pretty much known for its humor. It's pretty much titled the MCU humor now, which is pretty much these quips and one-liners that happen throughout these movies that add a little bit more to the story. I think this is one of those instances where sort of the humor and stuff like that adds to the seriousness, but there is some jokes that feel a little bit out of place, such as when Shuri is showing Chadwick Boseman's character the Black Panther suit for the first time, where she's kind of explaining what it's capable of and stuff, has him pretty much fire off rounds at it to kind of show that it is bulletproof, and then she's kind of looking at his shoes and is like, what are those? Like, that whole entire line was such cringe. There's a lot of really cringe-worthy dialogue in this movie, but it's also mixed in with some really good one-liners in this film, and I think that's one of the things that I look for in a movie, is whether or not it has sort of really good one-liners in the movie, and whether or not it has really good action sequences and stuff like that that happens in this movie. There's a sequence that takes place in South Korea where Black Panther is hunting down Claw. You see sort of the fight sequence that happens in this club or this casino-like area, similar to that of Star Wars The Last Jedi, which I don't really want to bring up that movie again. And it kind of leads to this car chase sequence where they eventually meet up with Claw, and he's pretty much like, King, have mercy. Sure, he's pretty much like, the world is watching. She's kind of like, halt the attack and everything, because if you do this, you know, everybody's got cameras and stuff like that out, and they're pretty much going to plaster this all over sort of the internet. Black Panther kind of shows him a little bit mercy. That's when you sort of get the conflict between Killmonger and T'Challa. Killmonger pretty much comes back after killing Claw later on in the film. He pretty much shoots him, but you kind of don't know for certain if Claw is dead until Killmonger pretty much brings him in a body bag. You see that he also has one of the Black Panther rings, and T'Challa at first doesn't really believe that Killmonger is actually a part of Wakanda, that he's just trying to pose as sort of a Wakandian, so that way he can kind of try and get in and get back to the throne. They eventually have this big giant battle sequence that takes place out the side of the waterfall, like in the beginning of the film. Actually, Killmonger beats and nearly destroys T'Challa, which leads everybody to kind of mourn for the loss of T'Challa. He is pretty much broken and beaten, which is kind of the all that is lost moment in this film, which is one of the sort of moments that happens in Blake Snyder's Save the Cat. There's kind of a story beat, and that's pretty much one of them. And then later on, you know, Black Panther has a Dark Night of the Soul. He pretty much comes back, and there's this big giant battle sequence that happens on Wakanda, which is actually a substitute for Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta, Georgia is the place that they filmed most of the scenes for Wakanda, because they couldn't actually film in Africa, which I think is kind of stupid. Like I said before with Contagion, I always think it's kind of dumb when they can't actually film in sort of Africa. They filmed District 9 in Africa. They've also filmed Elysium and other movies in Africa, so I don't know why they couldn't actually film Black Panther in Africa. I think it would have added sort of a new take, a little bit more of a realistic tone to it if they actually shot there. But I understand the kind of limitations and the constraints and the logistics of actually like bringing people to that nation and kind of filming in Africa itself, because you don't really get that much tax breaks, and they're trying to keep it so they kind of limit the budget as much as possible so that way they can make a return on the film. This leads to this big giant CGI battle sequence that happens. You also get a face-off between Shuri and Killmonger as well as Black Panther. A lot of the action sequences in this movie is really, really well shot. I think that this is one of those movies where Ryan Coogler did a really good job of kind of conveying the action sequences, and I think that Ryan Coogler actually knows, like the Wachowskis, how to place a shot and make it really interesting. With the sort of unfinished CGI in this film, it is really distracting in some parts when the rhinos are kind of coming after them and you kind of see them kind of riding them. It looks like some of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man 1 and 2 sort of graphics where it kind of came from that era. Like in a movie like this, it shouldn't feel like that. It shouldn't feel like they couldn't finish this in time for the release, so they kind of had to push this out anyway. It should feel like it's a movie that has some finished CGI and that everything looks polished and stuff like that, because this is a movie that's setting up for Avengers Infinity War. And so being that this is kind of in chronological order for a film that's going to take place later, you'd think that they would want to show sort of a finished product before they actually released it, but I think they kind of got bogged down by sort of the release date, and they just decided that this is kind of the finished product and we're just going to greenlight it with this kind of unfinished CGI. There's also a fight sequence between Killmonger and T'Challa where they're kind of falling down this mountain, beating each other up, and they're kind of kicking each other and pushing each other, and they're in pretty much free fall mode, and all of a sudden they kind of slam into the ground, and there's sort of this underground kind of track, and you see sort of the unfinished graphics in this movie, and it's really something that you notice, not something that you should notice within the film. There's kind of a standoff between Black Panther and Killmonger, and he pretty much states that, you know, different than me and stuff like that, and that we're pretty much fighting for the same reasons. Black Panther is pretty much stating that, no, we're kind of different, like you only see black and white, I kind of am fighting for the greater good of all my people. And so eventually Black Panther does defeat Killmonger. Eventually Black Panther does succeed in actually defeating him and retaking the throne once more. He does have this sort of hero's journey where at first, when everything's going down, sort of Killmonger is actually taking control over Wakanda. He doesn't know if he wants to do this. He doesn't know if he wants to fight anymore. He doesn't know if he's actually capable of defeating him, because Killmonger is pretty much the alter ego of T'Challa. He's pretty much the other half and sort of guy that thinks he's doing what's right when actually he's doing wrong, which is pretty much the mark of a good villain. And you know, so many times in these Marvel movies, they really do have trouble with creating these interesting and unique villains. But I think Killmonger is something that really is interesting to a lot of people, especially myself. Just the fact that what he believes is wrong, even though he thinks that what he's doing is right. And I think that's a mark of a really good villain, especially in any film altogether. Eventually, T'Challa actually rises up and kind of defeats Killmonger. He eventually kind of gets control of the throne, like I said before, and all seems right with the world. world. You think that this movie is going to be over with, but then it kind of sets up for the future of the MCU movies, where you kind of see sort of the White Wolf, as they call him, or Sebastian Stan's the Winter Soldier appear, and he's pretty much handed a giant metal arm. And I think it's really cool to kind of set up this in this movie. You don't really know what happened to the Winter Soldier after Captain America Civil War. You just see him that he's pretty much locked up in solitary and he can't really get out. That's when you see him in this movie, and he's in Africa, and he's actually kind of learning the ways of the Wakandians and stuff like that. I think it's a really good turn of events for his character, especially with what happened to him in Civil War. But that is another movie review for another time. That's when it leads into Avengers Infinity War. I really like this movie. I think that this movie was a fantastic film in terms of its story. I don't think this is one of those movies that kind of deserved as much praise and accolades as it was, just because of the unfinished CGI and sort of the origin story of the fact that this is sort of telling the events of Black Panther in terms of the Marvel MCU. I know this is kind of loosely based off the comic books and it's not comic book accurate, but there are stuff to like about this movie. There is stuff to like about sort of the dialogue, the action sequences, and some of the cast and characters in this film, which everybody in this movie feels like they belong. Everybody in this movie, including sort of Andy Serkis in The Hobbit actor, I forget his name offhand, but I'm sure I'm going to remember it down the line. Even he does a really good job in this movie, and he's been great in everything that I've seen him in the past, especially Whiskey Tango Foxtrot with Margot Robbie and sort of the other Hobbit films. Like, he's been sort of the thing that kind of audiences can kind of relate to, and you kind of see the outsider's perspective from this character in this movie. And I really like that about this movie. I think this movie is, a fun time at the theaters, or if you're watching this on Disney Plus, or if you buy this movie on Blu-ray. I certainly own it on Blu-ray, and I do have Disney Plus, so I can pretty much watch this anytime I want to now. And being that this is just a movie that was added to Disney Plus, I think that if you really want to watch this movie, definitely give it a shot. Some people might hate it. I was on the camp that kind of liked it, even though I don't really think it's a B or an A. I think this is pretty much a C-grade movie, and being that it's a C-grade movie, to me, it's not really that big of a deal. It's not, it's still a movie that I can watch from time to time, but it's not a movie that I would consider fantastic or spectacular by any means. It's just a really, really good Marvel movie, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with sort of having these C-grade Marvel movies mixed in with these B or A films like Avengers Infinity War or Endgame. I just think that kind of adds to sort of the overall arc of these characters and kind of adds more nuances to them. And that's what I think Black Panther is. I think it's a really good origin story that kind of sets up sort of the events that would lead to Infinity War and Endgame. And I think if you like Black Panther and Civil War, you're going to really like this character in this movie. So that's why I'm going to have to give Black Panther a C. Hopefully you guys like this review. As always, guys, if you like this and you want to see more in the future, please rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.